Hi everyone, this is Ronnie from Everything Vive, and today I am going to be giving my thoughts and impressions on Twilight Path. It's the latest VR title that has been released from Charm Games. They're the ones behind Form. We've had them on the show multiple times. I think, Alan, Derek, Dino, like a lot of those, the people I've talked to over there are super thoughtful, just amazing guys. They do amazing stuff with VR. And so I was very, very excited to get my hands on Twilight Path. This is the first time I got to play it, so I wasn't, I didn't get a chance to play any like early versions of the game or anything like that. So really I got to play, the final experience that everyone is able to pick up on Steam or from the Oculus store. And right off the bat, I was very impressed with what I saw. So, basically what I had heard, and I hadn't heard a ton about the game prior to its release, but I knew Charm Games was looking to include more of a narrative this time around rather than, what they did in the past. And I think more so than just narrative, I think the main focus was trying to, part of the focus anyways, was trying to incorporate more characters into the game. And at least that was the impression I got from some of my discussions with them, is that, this was on a much bigger scale than their past games because of that. But I mean, honestly, I don't know if it was just me, not fully understanding exactly what they were going for, or if, perhaps they undersold some of the stuff. But really, I thought that the biggest difference between Form and Twilight Path in terms of the scope and in general, the thing that really stands out the most about Twilight Path is the environments. The scope and scale of what they were able to do in Twilight Path is incredible. It's breathtaking in a lot of ways. And on one hand, it's some of the best work I've seen in VR to date. On the other hand, it's just kind of like a taste of I think what this team is capable of, and really what the medium's capable of delivering an experience like Twilight Path. So with that in mind, let's talk a little bit more about the game just generally, what type of a game it is for those interested in kind of looking out for it. I would describe Twilight Path for the most part as being a puzzle game. Basically the way you get from beginning to end of this title is by solving various simple puzzles that involve kind of, moving things in VR, lining things up, most of the puzzles honestly are all very simple. So they're not like overly challenging, but at the same time there's a lot of instances where they just feel super satisfying. So you feel like on one hand that you're able to solve something, on the other hand, you're not overly frustrated, and just the mechanics of solving them themselves in VR are really satisfying. And I'd say that that's one of the best parts about the gameplay of Twilight Path, is the fact that everything just feels fun, feels right. The interactions are all enjoyable for the most part. And what else can you say about, really for me, for most VR titles, it's all about presence, about being, witness to something, incredible. And then also just the, enjoyment that you get out of interacting with things. If the interactions feel good, if it feels fun to interact with objects in that world, then you're going to be having a good time. And all of those main points are ticked here with Twilight Path. So yeah, it's a puzzle game. Like I said, you're solving various puzzles to get from point to point. And then the mechanics in which, like I was mentioning, some things you're moving, just with your hands, like objects in front of you. But then the biggest added mechanic that they included in Twilight Path compared to Form and, compared to most puzzle games that you'll experience, is the fact that you're able to interact not only with objects that are in your immediate vicinity, like stuff that you can reach, but you're also able to interact with things that are far away in the distance. And so at first, that's one of the first things that the game teaches you right when you boot it up. The first time it gets right into the tutorial. If you boot it up for someone if you boot it up, after playing it, multiple times, it's still going to ask you if it's your first time playing or not, so that it knows whether or not to teach you kind of, the new mechanic or not. And I think that's a really good, that throughout the game, there's a lot of really smart choices in terms of accessibility, in terms of making sure that players are comfortable. In this instance, if you're booting up the game for someone that hasn't played it before, or if you're booting it up for someone that's new to VR, which I think this would be an excellent experience to show someone that's never tried VR. But all of those instances, it makes it just super easy for the player that, let's say you're showing it off to someone for the first time. It's really simple to move past it if you've played it before. But if you haven't, then these are all, making it super easy to show to the tutorial to a new player is a major advantage. And again, it's not intrusive to the player that's coming back or anything like that. So I think it's a smart choice. But anyways, so they teach you right at the beginning of the game through a tutorial that basically if you hold down both triggers on the controllers, you'll see this little logo or this floating insignia of a yin yang kind of, for one side of the symbol for each of the triggers that you're pulling. So they start from where your controllers more or less are, and then they go together and then form the yin yang. And if you let go of the triggers right when the two pieces meet, then all of a sudden you now have control of cursors that are kind of extended into the distance of your play area. And so the whole purpose of that is that you can select and interact with objects that are in the background of the scenes that you're going to be in. So this is a super smart way of being able to make it so that you do have immediate control of selecting things in the distance, but at the same time, it also prevents you from getting frustrated. Sorry, I just stopped there for a second to make sure that I wasn't having any technical issues with the recording. But yeah, the brilliance of being able to select that option to interact with things in the distance, and that you actually have to go through a mechanic to enable that, is that whenever you're interacting with things in the immediate foreground, stuff that's right in front of you, you know that that's not going to be an issue. So if something's in front of you, you're interacting with it, the game knows you're just trying to interact here. And in order for it to kind of, to switch gears, so to speak, and then have you access things that are farther away, you actually have to trigger this mechanic. So super smart there. And initially I just thought it was kind of an interesting choice. It's, like I said, at the very beginning, after doing the tutorial and then seeing the initial instances where you're using it, I thought it was an interesting choice, but I didn't really understand fully how game impacting it was going to be. It almost reminds me of certain mechanics, like in Paper Valley, for example, when you're throwing paper airplanes to hit objects in the distance. Like teleportation, for example, in this game works similarly to a game like Paper Valley, where you actually have to hit certain nodes in order to move from place to place. It's not just like a free-for-all kind of teleportation type locomotion system. So I initially I thought, oh, okay, this is just a way to interact with things in the distance so that I can move from place to place or that. But really, the way that the system plays itself out is it opens up the puzzles. It allows the game to make the entire environment around you part of the puzzle that you're interacting with, instead of just what's immediately in front of you. And I mean, there's so many examples of this. I don't want to really give away how any of the puzzles work or anything like that, because it's just fun to kind of see what they're like and experience them for yourselves. But imagine, like I said, imagine the entire game world around you as being one big puzzle, and being able to do portions of the puzzle in your immediate vicinity, but then being able to, with almost magical powers, be able to interact with other parts of the environment without actually having to pull knobs or move switches themselves, but you're actually able to move those things in front of you, but then also be able to move things with your powers in the distance that are all incorporated into those same puzzles. So, and I mean, along the same lines of choosing the method in which players can interact with things in the world, I think it was also just such a brilliant move to control where the player's vantage at every point in this game. So, like I said, you can't freely move around the environment. There's no kind of free for all locomotion or just you can't teleport anywhere you want to go. But there's very specific points that the game allows you to move to within the environment. So yeah, you are teleporting in a sense, but you're just basically moving from point to point throughout the game, and all of those points are designed specifically to advance the story forward. So you're basically moving from spot to spot to spot, and at each spot you're solving puzzles to then be able to move on to the next spot. And what this allows is the fact, this movement system allows you to not only see amazing sights around you, and for the developers to be able to craft a very beautiful and super vibrant game world for you to see. They know what angles you're going to be seeing it at, so they can make all the lighting and all of the effects and all of that just really pop, all the contrasting colors and the scenery, etc. Not only can they do that with the vantage point, but then, like I said, they can incorporate the entire game world into the puzzles. So they know exactly what angles you're going to be seeing certain things from, and so they know what the player is going to notice, and they can make the puzzles easier or harder, or kind of give you clues based on your location. So I tend to be one of those people that gets stuck in a lot of these puzzle games, and fortunately I can say that in Twilight Path I didn't get stuck very often. Like, everything was very intuitive, and again, like I said, it was challenging enough to where I felt good about solving things, but then there was never a situation where I felt like the game was being too obtuse or too unfair as to what it was asking of me. Everything is kind of there in front of you to kind of notice, and they give you the adequate tools to deal with any situation. So along what I was mentioning before, in addition to just giving you tools to interact with the environment, they also give you this wrist bracelet that you can pull kind of an orb from, that lets you see certain like hidden markings in the world. And so those are also like kind of cool ways, like in every situation. Not only are you able to interact with the puzzles in front of you, but you also get this opportunity to let me first pull out my orb to see if there's anything hidden before I start working on this puzzle. And like I was mentioning before, with the fact that everything that you interact with in the game just feels good, even in situations where the orb didn't unveil anything. It was the feel of pulling it from your wrist and then moving it around the environment and kind of looking around through it to see if there's anything hidden. That act in and of itself is really satisfying. Something about the effects that they used on the orb and kind of the how it warps your vision when you're looking through it, and again, like being able to toss it once you're done with it, and it kind of floats away and then disappears and goes back to your wrist. Everything about it just feels fun and fluid and just well implemented. So there's everything that you do in this game, you can tell they paid a lot of attention to detail to make sure that they just made everything feel fun and right. And that degree of polish is something that really stands out in Twilight Path. So I talked a little bit about, the main gameplay mechanics. I talked about how the movement system, kind of in addition to the interaction systems, how the fact that you teleport from place to place and how they're able to really craft and really shape what the player is seeing and doing based on the fact that they know where you're going to be looking at it from. And I think that's a pretty good transition. One more thing to mention is they do vary up movement in this game by including a vehicle character, which I'm not going to get too much into, but again, I thought that was a really interesting way to kind of switch up the movement, because if you're just going from place to place to place, that I could see that getting a little bit old throughout the game. There's other examples of games that have done that, and I think are fine, like Paper Valley, for example. It reminds me a lot of the pacing and movement in this game reminds me of that game in a positive sense. But they do vary up that kind of movement system by including a vehicle that you can teleport onto that will then move by itself. So you're on the vehicle standing and it's moving. And again, they still are in control of your vantage point from that vehicle. So it's still has all the positive aspects that I talked about before with the teleportation system, but it does add some varying degrees of movement there and makes things just generally more interesting. So I guess that's a good transition. Like I was going to get to talk about some of the characters in the game. Clearly, the aesthetic, the characters, and the storyline, for that matter, was a big part of what they're trying to push in Twilight Path. And on that level, the game is a little bit of a mixed bag for me. So on one hand, I thought that the characters themselves did have a lot of personality. They were all very interesting, and they all were modeled spectacularly. Some of that goes to the scale that I talked about before, just like with the environments having a very impressive sense of scale. The various characters also have that huge sense of scale, which I think is just incredible. Like there were moments in this game where I literally, like, my jaw dropped. I was like, not only from the environments, but from the characters themselves. And I think, scale is something that, being able to interact with small and large things in VR is unlike dealing with things. Like you can't really mimic those types of experiences in any other types of platforms. And so whenever I see those types of things being incorporated, I get super excited. I mean, the Blue, for example, seeing the whale for the first time in VR was one of the coolest things that I'd ever experienced. And there are interactions in this game, again, not wanting to spoil anything, that rival those in terms of my memory, in terms of witnessing something in VR for the first time and just being, kind of mind blown in how it was presented to me and how cool it was to experience it. So the characters allow for moments like that. On the other hand, I did feel like, for me personally, and this could just be my own deficiencies, but it was a little bit hard at times to follow. Like I thought the plot kind of threw a lot at me, especially like in the intro. Like it threw a lot at me very quickly, and then likewise in the game, during the game, I would be introduced to something, and it was kind of a lot of heavy concepts or dialogue, and obviously like the character designs, they shine through brilliantly, and they're all like, there are certain archetypes of these characters that are just kind of obvious when you see them. Okay, like you kind of get the sense of what like the roles of a lot of these different characters are, regardless of how much you retain from the storytelling. But that was just one thing that I noticed throughout. I struggled to follow all of the details that I can tell that they spent a lot of time working through. And as I'll get to later on, I mean, since this doesn't look like it's going to be the last of our experiences in VR in the Twilight Path world, I just that's just one of the things that was a little bit hard for me to digest. And I don't know if it's just the pacing of the game or the methods that they chose for delivery through dialogue and all of that, but it was a little bit hard for me to follow some of the story, at least through my first playthrough. Getting back to that, like just the general narrative of the story being, taken to the spirit realm, and then trying to find a way out of it. And, again, not to spoil the ending, but I mean, you find out early on that that's kind of your main mission, is to try to, reach a certain point within the spirit world, so that you can hopefully go home. And all of that was presented fairly well. But again, just with the pacing, like felt like I was just doing puzzles until a certain point where all of a sudden certain of those puzzles had like a very specific, point to them that interacted with the story. And some of those later moments in the game are so cool. Not again, without giving away anything. There's like a pseudo boss battle, for example, near the end of the game that was incredible, and it used some of the scope that I mentioned in dealing with the characters, along with the environment, along with the puzzles, and incorporated the story in ways that everything just worked together and felt super cool. Like there was some pressure to solving them quickly, and just all around it kind of was a glimpse of what more of this game could be like. And it made me wish that there was another third of the game at least to experience where all these things were incorporated. And talking about kind of some of what was difficult for me to follow as far as the story kind of leads me into the major negative that I have about the game, and that it feels like it just got you to that point where everything's starting to click and then it's over. So the game is a little bit short for my taste, and I don't say that lightly. Most of the time I'm super forgiving about how much time a VR game takes to finish, because I know how, especially like when a well-crafted game like Twilight Path, comes around, how much time and effort it takes in these games, and how they're all selling for relatively low prices, and all these developers are trying to recoup on costs and whatnot. But still, like, the reason I say that Twilight Path feels short has nothing to do with value. It just has to do with how great the game is. I mean, literally, it feels like it does such a good job of kind of slowly introducing you to the elements of the game in a clear way. And then right when you're getting the gist of how everything works together, you get like this one or two examples of implementing everything with all cylinders clicking, and then the game's over. And it's just such a tease in some respects, because you're having so much fun, and right when the game is like at its peak and it's only been there for a very short amount of time, then you're greeted with a credit screen and it's over. So, I mean, it's in a large way, this is a major compliment to the game, but it's just, I was just getting warmed up and really getting into it when all of a sudden I realized that the game was over, and that was kind of a bummer. So, especially given the fact that I've been waiting for this game for so long, I was sad that it was over as quickly as it was. It took me, probably an hour and a half-ish. Yeah, probably between 1 to 2 hours to beat. And it's, again, there are other games that are shorter than that I wouldn't have the same complaints about, but just the way in which the game ramps up and then gets everything clicking and then is over, just makes you feel like, maybe they bit off a little bit more that they could chew, or they just wanted to get the game out, and so they did. And you just, like, it would be nice. I think this game is amazing and totally worth picking up regardless of the runtime. But you hope that a second game would come out that would be able to pick up like closer to where this game left off than starting over from scratch, so that you could build up on all of the cool things that you had experienced and learned through the original Twilight Path in a potential sequel. So that's the only thing. Not knowing what they're working on, not knowing what a follow-up to Twilight Path could be, just makes me a little bit sad as to, not really sad, but just hoping that this is almost like an episode 1 out of a series that's going to build on a lot that they learned here, that they took the player through, both in terms of the storyline, obviously, but more importantly, through the gameplay. I feel like the gameplay was starting to get really interesting and complex, and I hope that there's more of that interaction between using puzzles to directly affect the narrative. Puzzles that are involved in boss battles, puzzles that, using all these mechanics to to more directly influence the story and engage the player in these kind of moments. So because there were so many cool moments, and like as cool as a moment is when you are like seeing a character in front of you where there's no interaction, when you're actually in a battle moment or doing something that more directly impacts those characters in that world, it makes it just that more engaging. It makes you feel like, less like you're just in a random puzzle game, and more like you're in a world that's, that you actually have some power over. So I guess moving on from the gameplay itself, I did want to touch on kind of the more arts / technical side of things, because I think that's one of the most impressive areas of Twilight Path. I do not say this lightly when I say that I think Twilight Path is probably the most impressive, visually stunning game that I've played in VR. There are a lot of games that I've really enjoyed the graphics in, but just Twilight Path, some of the stuff is on another level. Like from the opening start, that they give you some of the details on the storyline similar to Moss at the very beginning, where you are opening a storybook and kind of learning about the spirit world and what this stuff is all about. And just like the textures on the book when you first see it, and the lighting in the room, and the ambiance of the sound around you, like all of these things were super impactful my first time. A lot of the particle effects, the stars that are in the sky, or the sparkles, just all this stuff really stood out as being super polished, super detailed. And I'm playing this on, like, for this portion. Obviously, I have a Rift, I have a Vive. I use the original Vive while I play this game, and even in the original Vive headset, just everything looked a lot sharper than I would expect. And as far as I could tell, I mean, there wasn't any kind of I didn't have super sampling options to choose from in the menus. But everything looked super sharp and crisp, and the details really stand out. There's a lot of cool effects like clear, reflective, like glass type, like the best way to some of the cool effects kind of remind me of Doctor Strange in a way, where you see like shattered reality in front of you, or being able to interact with some of the puzzles with your hands to where you're just touching something with your finger that's in the air and then moving it like you're making like a magical gesture. Like I know I'm talking about the technical side of these things. They all look amazing, but they feel equally amazing. And like, I think it's the high graphical fidelity mixed with the solid feel to it all that really like shines. And then moving from that initial storybook introduction to your first being in the game world and seeing like you're in kind of like a city kind of corridor environment at night, and you see the glow of lanterns around you, and you enter into this I forget the name of it. It started with a C, but it's kind of like an old village type, like it's like an antique shop in a way, and just everything just like has the right feel to it. Like you feel like you're in a Miyazaki or Studio Ghibli film to some extent. Like everything has a real sense of personality to it. Just the environments themselves really do have just like a feel and a presence to them that is a character in and of itself. And as cool as those first environments are, I think when you first enter the spirit realm is when I was just truly blown away by the visuals. The sense of scale of the environments, and again, because they know where you're going to be seeing the environment from, they're able to craft it in a way to make it look that much more large and kind of, bigger than life, because they know what your vantage point is. But I mean, just all of it's done exceptionally well. And again, like everything just has such a strong level of detail to it. The textures are very like three-dimensional and very like, while some of them don't look especially high resolution, like the effects that they're using to kind of bring them to life, I don't think really like I didn't personally watch it on the screen to see what it looked like there, but in the headset, everything just looks super realistic, super sharp. Like it has that kind of like artistic side to it where it feels again like larger than life, but then at the same time everything feels grounded in reality. And once you're in the spirit world, you just go from one location to the other, and all of them are more beautiful than the next, and all of them have different like major like eye-catching moments that just like there were multiple times where my breath was taken away in terms of how beautiful the surroundings were around me. And so like again, if there's anything that like really made this one of those can't miss experiences, I think it was really the environments, the artwork, the scope and scale of those environments and characters for that matter, as well as just like your sense of presence within those environments. I think if that was all you were getting here, like for those reasons alone, I think this is just a can't miss title for people that are super into VR and VR done well. And along the same lines of creating that sense of scale and making things feel right and realistic to the player, I think the lighting design is probably one of the largest reasons that you feel so grounded. The lighting is just very, very beautiful, and it affects not only the environment but the characters in a very consistent and believable way. Like the characters themselves look more impressive and more beautiful because of how they're being lighted while you're viewing them in the game. And again, I could only imagine, because the developers were able to know where you were going to be relative to those characters in most of these circumstances, that they were able to, position the lights in a way that really makes everything pop. But I mean, yeah, you're starting from one time a day, and over time there is a progression of time across the world, and you start at a certain point in the day, and it's the sun looks like it's going down, and then you're in some interior environments, and just from beginning to end, everything was very, very impressive as far as the lighting went. Just felt real, felt awe-inspiring, felt sufficiently fantastical, but also realistic, and just overall, like I said, just super impressed, and makes you feel really like you're in a place. I'm trying to think if there's any. I mean, there were so many little things that just like, again, the attention to detail in this game as far as the technical side of things. The audio, I think, was super well done. The voice acting was great. Sometimes some of the voices in my headset anyways, and I'm using the deluxe audio strap for my Vive, sometimes some of the voices sounded like they were a little bit echoey when maybe they shouldn't have been. Like in some of the outdoor environments, they felt like you were kind of in a cave or something. I don't know if that's a setting I had in my head, like something I have set up wrong in my audio settings, because I've noticed in other VR games that sometimes with some of the more spatial audio, the voices tend to sound a little bit like that. It sounds appropriate when you're in indoor environments, but just outdoor environments, something sounds a little bit unnatural to me. Just with the voices, but then with the sound effects, you don't have those same problems, and everything sounds super spatial. And like one of the coolest things, at the beginning, you have this like potion bottle, and when you're shaking the potion bottle, you can hear the liquid inside the bottle, and like the sound design around this bottle was so strong that it felt like I almost thought that they were using haptics to kind of simulate the feeling of the liquid inside. Later I tried to see what they were doing, and it didn't seem like any haptics were in use, but it was just the sound was so accurate to the location that I was shaking it in that I felt like there was something there. And again, like I could be overthinking this, whatever, but like I would shake the bottle next to my left ear, shake it, continue to shake it, move it to my right ear, and like the whole time it just like the sound just was very convincing to me. And there were lots of other examples of those types of situations where I could kind of pinpoint certain sounds, but like whatever they did, whether it's true spatial audio or just just proper use of stereo channels, it seemed very convincing to me, and just the like whether it be the ambiance or like sounds like music in the background or the character voices, all of that stuff was really well done. And so I guess that brings me to kind of the end. I should point out that there were a couple of times where the puzzles glitched out on me from the technical side of things. One of the first puzzles in the game, I had some of there are these like kind of slotted like these little like clay, I don't know, pieces with tracks drawn on them that you have to line up in a certain way to activate a machine. And when I was moving them around to reposition them to get through the puzzle, one of them got caught in the cabinet that I was standing next to, and I wasn't able to get it out without reloading the game. There were a couple of times like that where something would get stuck somewhere and I'd have to reload. But for the most part, they weren't really major issue. I would say that if anything like that happens to you when you experience the game, rather than trying to solve the puzzle without getting the object back, I mean, if you wait like, a minute or two and it doesn't look like the object's going to respawn in its original location, it looks like it's stuck somewhere, to just, quit the game out to the title screen, load it back up. It'll start you almost right at the beginning of that puzzle, which none of the puzzles are super long, so it's super forgiving. And in my experience, it was always if it happened, it would happen once and it never happened again. So if you quickly just reload the game, you're back to the beginning of that puzzle. You can go from there, and then you usually won't run into the same problem. So, I mean, out of the couple hours of runtime, I think that happened to me twice with two of the puzzles. So out of, I don't know how many puzzles, out of, many, probably, I don't know how many puzzles there were, like 20, 30, like maybe it happened once or twice, but it was always relatively short and kind of obvious when something was going on. So that, technically speaking, I really didn't have any issues with the game at all, but it's just something I wanted to point out, because if you do experience a problem like that, I think it's in your best interest to just reboot the game, because then it'll immediately fix it, rather than you trying to be frustrated and try to save that object somehow from the glitch. But yeah, so overall, technically superior to most VR games out there. Gameplay, incredible. Sense of scale and environments, just way up there. A little bit short. Definitely feels like it's kind of, they got to a point where they're really hitting their stride, and then rather than continuing on it would have been nice to have like another, 30-ish, 40 minutes of gameplay there. It would have felt super satisfying to be able to take some of those late game moments where they're incorporating kind of the story, the puzzles, everything you've learned together. It would have been cool to see that played out more, rather than just kind of the one instance at the end. But, they're quick to point out after the credits that Twilight Path will be back, almost Marvel-esque in terms of giving you that final message. So I can't say that as I had a ton of fun with this game, and I absolutely can't wait to see the next installment of this series, because like I said, I had a blast, and while it was over a little bit sooner than I would have liked, it really did do some things that you don't see too often in other VR titles. So those are most of my thoughts on Twilight Path. There's some things that they can work on. The the narrative storytelling, for example, like I said, for me, it was a little bit hard to follow. Maybe it was like information overload. I don't know. But that's something that potentially could improve. The other thing, as much as the technical visuals and artistic side of things was just like super awe-inspiring and amazing, I'd say the animation was a little bit weaker on the characters, so that's something I could see improving, the next time around a little bit. But overall, the gameplay is fun and satisfying. As a puzzle game, it can be a little bit challenging but never frustrating, and everything feels right, and the game gives you a super strong sense of presence and amazing sense of scale. So I definitely recommend people picking up Twilight Path. It looks like it's about $15 normally, which is definitely not too high, even at the short game length, in my opinion. But right now it's on sale, I think, or it was on sale anyway. So if you're even semi interested in this game, you should definitely be on the lookout, add it to your wish list. And if you're not already sold on getting it at $15, I would immediately purchase it whenever you see it on sale, because if it goes anywhere under that price, it's honestly a steal for what you're getting. This is a game that would be very easy to recommend to people that are new to VR, and it's definitely a game that if you do have a couple of hours, you could probably have somebody sit through and play most of the experience, if not all of it, and be able to play a narrative-driven kind of full-on single-player experience in VR from beginning to end. So, and everything is explained really well and super comfortable. One of the coolest little attention to detail things that I noticed was the fact that when you move out of tracking range, rather than just disconnecting or going black or white, it slowly fades. So when you're getting away from where you need to be in the game. It wants you to stand in a certain spot, and it very subtly tells you that you're moving away from that so that you can move back to. All of these things are great for people that are new to VR, and I can see titles like this, if people know about them and are able to experience them, being really popular to people that are new to the high-end VR platforms. And if they make their way to future platforms like the Oculus Quest, I can see these being super valuable experiences for people to have in their libraries. So that's my thought on Twilight Path. We'll see if we can get those guys on the show to talk more about the development process, some of the choices they made, and perhaps some of the things that they learned, from this. But it's definitely one that I think you need to pick up and play, because if there's going to be more Twilight Path in the way, this is the first step to continuing on down that path. Pun intended. So thank you very much, as always, for listening, and look forward to more episodes from us in the future. Take care and have a good one.